So I'm on MLB Now. I'm playing the role of analyst with Brian Kenny, which is always a bit of a challenge when you're a host playing the analyst, but it can work. And Brian Kenny's talking about starting pitchers and saying they're a relic of the past. And I laughed. I said, like Kirk Douglas and Spartacus. And he kind of brushed me off and he keeps going on his topic. And later on, Bob Costas joins the show and Bob's answering Brian's questions. And just as Brian's letting Bob go, he goes, "Hey, by the way, Adnan, nice Spartacus reference, very, very current." And I go, "Hey, all right, hey, Bob Costas is listening. All right, great." And then maybe a month later, I'm on once again MLB Now. And this time, Brian Kenny's talking about the 69 Mets. And I said, geez, Brian Kenny knows a lot more about baseball than me and Joel Sherman. So I said, well, let me approach it the way I would, which is that in Men in Black 3, there's a character named Don Clendenin. He's of the 69 Mets, and Barry Sonnenfeld, the director, loves the 69 Mets, etc. So I dropped that nugget on them. And again, both of them kind of look perplexed and just move on with the conversation. And later on, Bob Costas joins again. And Bob at the end goes, "Hey, by the way, Adnan, I got to tell you, you mentioned Get Shorty and Men in Black 3. If there was a different time and era, rather than later with Bob Costas, it'd be later with Adnan Burke." And now I feel like $1,000,000. Now I'm like, all right. I go home and I get a text message and it says, "No joke, I really am a fan, -BC." And I looked at my wife and I go, well, there can be only one BC. So I'm about to faint. I think Bob Costas just sent me a text message. And, they say never meet your heroes. But I got to tell you, Bob Costas is about as generous and genuine as it gets. Since that little interplay, we have had dinner with Ben Mankiewicz. We've had many a phone conversation, many a text message, and it's a wonder to bring in, I believe, the 29-time Emmy Award winner. I may be shorting him at least one. But Bob, it is great to see you. Thank you for your generosity, and I cannot wait to talk movies with you.
What a tremendous introduction that was. But by the way, BC could have been Billy Crystal, could have been Bryan Cranston.
Right.
Come on. And that's
That
just
would
off
have
the
been
top of my head. There's probably 100 BCs we could think of, BCs of note.
That's a good call. Bryan Cranston just happened to watch MLB Now that day, wanted to pass along a text.
There you go.
That's good stuff.
Both of them huge baseball fans, by the way. Both Crystal and Cranston, huge baseball fans.
And we're going to talk about Billy specifically later on, your friendship with him. But this got me to thinking, too. Let's go right here. Biggest celebrity baseball fans. If I had to give you a Mount Rushmore. So if we said Cranston, Dodgers, Crystal, obviously the Yankees. Jason Bateman, I think, is an avid Dodgers fan. He goes to the game. He scores the games. Yeah. Who is somebody you've met that you go, oh, my God, this guy's as big a fan as it gets?
Well, you got to go this way. You got to give a nod.
Billy Bob Thornton, Cardinals.
Got to give a nod to the Heartland.
Yeah.
John Hamm and John Goodman, huge Cardinal fans.
Yeah.
Right? If we branch out from movies into rock and roll, okay, George Thorogood of the Delaware Destroyers, huge Phillies fan. He's from Newark, Delaware, and Delaware, that part of Delaware is Phillies territory. He actually built a small ballpark in his backyard, which I vowed to visit going back 30 years, and I still never have. He has his own ballpark back there. We're all, not you, but George and I are getting up in age. But when we were 40, 45, somewhere in there, his thing was, come on, we're not playing softball. We're not playing wiffle ball. We're playing hardball, which is how people of a certain age referred to baseball. We're playing hardball.
George Thorogood.
No, he's bad to the bone.
I'm about to say, let's start dropping George Thorogood lyrics. So right now the audience is thinking, you're excited. Feel these nipples. Basketball, which you're fantastic in. And here's the problem. That line, that scene was in the trailer. So there's a legion of people, Bob, who haven't seen the movie, but they just know that line.
That's right.
Do you have any regrets, or was it, hey, it was fun, it was tongue-in-cheek, and if you get it, you're fine?
In retrospect, not only no regrets, I completely embrace it. The movie, it's not highbrow, that's for sure. But it has some very funny scenes, and a disproportionate number of them are me and Al.
Right.
Some of which we ad-libbed, some of which was in the script. But if you take it in the right spirit, a lot of it is very funny. But here's a story connected to the trailer. It comes out in 1998. Saving Private Ryan came out at the same time. Mm-hmm. I go with some friends in St. Louis to the Kirkwood Theater, which I don't think exists anymore, suburb of St. Louis. You could get in on a weekday for $1. Okay, $1. All right, first run movies. Okay, so I'm down, maybe halfway down on the right aisle, and the trailers are playing, and on comes the trailer for Basketball, which includes the Feel These Nipples line. And I try to be inconspicuous in situations like that, and we're in the dark in the theater, but apparently a few people had seen me purchasing my ticket and coming in. And from the back of the darkened theater, after the Feel These Nipples line plays, comes a solitary voice. Bob. Like, Bob, you're our boy. You let us down. You're a classy guy. Come on, you're the host of the Olympics. You're on the series. You're on the NBA Finals. What's the deal, Bob?
Well, there's so much of that was about your relationship with Al, and Al told the story in his book. And this is always dangerous. You know this. Guys are sitting around kibitzing, how much did you make? How much did you do this? In this instance, finding out how much a guy made almost put the film in jeopardy. In honor of Bad Dog, tell us that.
It's bad form to talk money. We break after the first few scenes. We break for lunch, and we're enjoying ourselves. But then they show us some of the dailies. And the way this worked was Al and I were on the last day of shooting, but we were indispensable because those scenes in the booth tie the whole movie together. So we never saw Yasmin Bleeth. We never saw Ernest Borgnine, Robert Vaughn. We never saw Kareem and Dan Patrick and Reggie Jackson, everybody else that was in the movie. It's just the two of us. And so now they show us the dailies. And Al gets back in the trailer and he goes, this sucks. What have we done to ourselves? And I say just offhandedly, well, at least it's a good payday. And then he looks at me, he goes, what do you mean? I said, it's not bad. He goes, what do you get? I said, what are you getting? I said, look, let's flip a coin. Whoever loses has to reveal first.
Smart.
So I lose, I reveal. I'm getting 5 times as much as he's getting. Okay. Now, no one's going to have to throw a benefit for Al Michaels in 1998 or now. Yeah. But Al is very competitive. And so he doesn't want me to get a penny more, let alone 5 times more. So he goes nuts, right? And he calls his agent and he says, if you don't get me what Costas is getting, I'm walking off the film. All right. And the first response from the Zucker brothers, who produced the movie, and the reason why I did it, hey, it's the Zucker brothers, Airplane, the Naked Gun series. This can't be bad. Basketball is a notch or two beneath the Naked Gun and Airplane, even though it has its moments. Okay. So the first response from the Zucker brothers is, go ahead and walk. You signed a contract. You signed a contract. Then Michaels points out shrewdly, if I walk, you don't have a movie. Yeah, he's right, isn't he? Okay, so now we got to give him the same as Costas, but knowing Al, he has to one-up them. It has nothing to do with me. Yeah. He got an additional 10 grand sort of as punitive damages, So he came out way ahead, and now now it's a source of, it comes up now and then, and it's a source of great amusement. There's no real embarrassment attached to it. But when you think about it, Al has some lines in this movie, which today, there's no way in the world those lines don't get edited out.
2024, very different environment for the likes of basketball. Yeah. How about Pootie Tang? I mean, if ever there was a film, someone said, how is Bob Costas and Pootie Tang? How did this come to be?
Here's how Bob Costas is in Pootie Tang. Chris Rock is the executive producer. He's also in it. He's not Pootie Tang. Lance Crowther is Pootie Tang, and a cast of thousands, which includes the great Wanda Sykes. But Chris Rock calls me. I want you to do this movie. Oh, it's Chris Rock. Of course I'm going to do it, right? So we shoot it in like 45 minutes on the set of my first HBO show. And Pootie Tang is the guest on the HBO show. And it was a little bit like what I take Curb Your Enthusiasm to be. No real script, just a broad outline. And we did 2 takes in the space of 45 minutes. There were 3 segments that I was on. I bookend the film with him. It begins with, he's on the show. And it's sort of like, let's take a look at the clip. And it turns out to be the longest clip in history. It was not that long a movie, maybe 90 minutes, but it's a 90-minute clip. And then we come back at the end and book, that's the longest clip I've ever seen. And in the middle, there's a segment with Wanda Sykes, who played Biggie Shorty. And the whole thing took 45 minutes.
Amazing. By the way, just as an aside, the Curb Your Enthusiasm, the interview you did with Larry David is one of the best I've ever seen, because you at one point listed all the things that he did in the show. And even he's laughing at the ridiculousness of these conceits, like children with big penises, like Milton Berle. Like, what is wrong with you?
Right. Here's the problem. Okay. This is both the upside and the downside of a podcast and the world in which we now live. Yeah. The world in which we now live allows you to send me a Zoom link and we do this show. And I'm teetering on the brink here of telling you a great Milton Berle story. But if I do, your audience will appreciate it, but it doesn't stay confined to here. And then vultures and aggregators with no sense of tone, context, or intention, then repurpose it, and it becomes a cause celeb beyond the original intention. So I'm not telling you this Milton Berle story now, but I will when we're not taping.
I was going to say,
it's not a Milton Berle story I heard. I've heard the Milton Berle stories regarding what you just sort of parenthetically alluded to. But this one actually took place on the set of Later.
I cannot wait till this interview is done. I can't wait till this interview is now done just to hear this story. Okay, 1993 Milton Berle. I'd forgotten you were in The Paper, which I've asked people like Jamel Hill. They go, that's my favorite movie. Anybody who's a journalist, are you kidding? The scene where Michael Keaton gets to say, stop the presses, and him and Glenn Close and Robert Duvall. I mean, tell me about The Paper.
Yeah, so Ron Howard and I were acquainted because he was a guest on Later, and he's a huge sports fan. I saw him once or twice at Laker games and whatnot. So he calls me, and it's right around the same time period, 1993, 94, somewhere in there. He says, are you in New York? Yeah, I'm in New York. Do you have a tuxedo? And I said, as it happens, I was at a banquet last night. Yes, I have a tuxedo. He says, good. Be at Radio City at 3:00. Wear the tuxedo. So I show up. I don't know what the scene is. And the scene turns out to be Jason Robards is the editor of The Paper. I think the editor, publisher, whatever. He's the bigwig. And Glenn Close has some sort of issue with him. And they're arguing at this big gala, which takes place at Radio City. And Radio City is an old and ornate building, which has one of those old school restrooms where there's an attendant with actual towels, you know, and you tip the guy $1 for giving you the towel. Okay. Yeah. So the scene is that Glenn Close is so absorbed in this argument with Jason Robards, who tries to walk away from her, and she pursues him down each and every hallway, still, you know, haranguing him over whatever her grievance is. And then he walks into this gigantic, ornate, high-ceiling men's room, and she follows him in. Okay? Mm-hmm. So Ron Howard says, we want somebody recognizable who is doing his business, not in the stall, but at the urinal. That's my role. And so I say to him jokingly, what's my motivation? And he goes, your motivation is you're taking a leak. Okay, fine. So the scene is, Robards walks in, she walks in, all of a sudden she slams on the brakes and looks around. Oh my gosh, what am I doing here? And I'm sort of over Robards' shoulder, quickly sort of zipping up and turning away. and he delivers his line, I wish you weren't here. And for whatever reason, blocking or something, they shot it about 5 times. And what was interesting to me was that Jason Robards did it exactly the same all 5 times. Even a trained eye, I don't think could distinguish take 2 from take 4. But Glenn Close put a different wrinkle in it each time. And her best one was when she turned to storm out, because she wasn't going to admit defeat. She turned to storm out, and she reached into the little wicker basket that had the towels, and she hadn't done anything. She grabbed the towel out, she pretended to be wiping her hands, and she tossed it away and walked out. And I think that's the take they kept.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because Tim Kirchen told me this at a Brockmire. He said, I saw like Amanda Peet, like just rip off this insane amount of dialogue, like pages and pages. Hank Azaria, same thing. And yet they couldn't do what we do. Like they couldn't read a teleprompter to save their life. It's insane. Like they had the mental acuity and the skills. You said Roberts could do the exact same way, but certain actors, just like broadcasters, can only do certain things. That's really cool. What do Paul Newman and Bob Costas have in common? Both voices in Cars. How incredible is that?
I was the voice of Bob Costas in Cars 1 and 3. And on 1, Paul Newman was a big star. And we happened to do, I think he probably had more voiceover sessions than I did. But on my voiceover session in New York, he happened to be there as well. So we crossed paths and we had a friendly chat. And then later I invited him to be on my HBO show, which was a hybrid between entertainment, show business, films, and sports. And as you know, he had a huge interest in auto racing, to the point where he actually had his own crew and his own cars that he owned. And we went up to Montreal. I forget what the event was. I'm not much of an auto racing guy, but we went and we filmed him at the event. But the big payoff was I had dinner with him, and he could not have been nicer. And he agreed to do an interview. And he played Rocky Graziano in Somebody Up There Likes Me, and of course the Hustler, the billiard scenes. So I don't know if there was any other sports stuff, but those two things gave us an excuse to kind of do the interview with him and fill out the other parts of it. What a classy and engaging guy.
I was going to say, I would just, if I sat, I would just ask him about the verdict, just pepper him with questions. One of the great performances, right? Alcoholic, down and out lawyer, great Boston movie, mammoth script, Lumet directing, and obviously a great humanitarian as well. All the money he's given away.
By the way, now that you mentioned cars, I get probably on a weekly basis 5 or 6 requests for autographs, not of pictures of me, but of pictures of the car of Bob Costas. So I sign it, Bob Costas, and then in parentheses, Cutlass. Right. And it's not uncommon for me to be out to dinner, and some youngish couple, in their 30s or whatever, will come up and say, "You're in our living room every night." What am I? Well, I don't do as much. It's because they have like a 4-year-old kid. And not only do kids, that demographic, like 3 to 6 for those Pixar films, it's not just that they like it, they'll watch it every day. A 4-year-old kid will watch it every day.
Yeah.
So apparently I've been inflicted upon unwitting parents, whether they want it or not.
I thought you were going to say every week you still get the residual check. $19.13 for cars. I'll take it. Add that to the coffers.
I'll say this about the Pixar people. They were extraordinarily generous. Yeah. I was stunned by, there was no negotiation. You just do it because, it's Pixar. Same reason you do it when Ron Howard calls or Chris Rock calls. They were extraordinarily generous up front. So I don't think there were any residuals involved. Al Michaels tells me that he still gets residual checks from basketball, and they'll be like $11.47 or something. And I guess I do too, but they go to someone else who keeps track of that for me.
Yeah, that's good to know. It's one people know about you, your passion for baseball and fondness, particularly for Mickey Mantle, and just reverence for him. You had your baseball card in your wallet, and of course, you were there, when he passed away, and obviously overseeing the entire ceremonies. It was beautiful what you had to say about Mickey and his relationship with him. And again, it makes me think about, as I said, for someone to admire someone so deeply and then become a part of their life and to know them, et cetera. And I said, the only other person you can relate to that on that level is Billy Crystal, because Crystal, of course, idolizes the Yankees and idolizes that era and Mickey Mantle as well. How did you and Billy become so close?
I remember getting on an elevator at NBC sometime in the early 80s. And Billy Crystal's on the elevator. And before I can say hello, and I think I'll have to introduce myself, Billy says, "Hi, Bob." And he's such a nice guy, but I was surprised that he recognized me and knew who I was. And we struck up a conversation about baseball and the Yankees and whatnot. And then fast forward to some point in the early 90s. And Billy and I are both staying at the Regency Hotel in New York. And George Steinbrenner had given Mickey a permanent suite, at least during the baseball season, for when he came in and did whatever he did for the Yankees as an ambassador. So we wind up in the bar one night with Mantle, and the place is just about closed down, and we're still swapping stories. And I remember Mickey, I wish I could do his Oklahoma drawl, but at one point he goes, "Shit, I did all this stuff, and I don't remember half of it. But you two little shits remember all of it." So that was his joke, right? But then he subsequently, when he went to the Betty Ford Clinic and got clean, and here's the tragedy of it. He got clean. He was seemingly healthy, new lease on life, new outlook. But then part of the life that he led caught up with him, and the liver cancer did him in barely a year later. But in that period of time, from after he got out of Betty Ford, before he fell ill again, he told me and Billy, a lot of times, especially if I'd been drinking, I didn't like it or understand it when everybody kind of wanted a piece of my time, and they wanted an autograph or they wanted a picture. And sometimes I wouldn't go places where I thought I'd be recognized. But you guys put a name and a face to all those thousands of people. You represented those people to me. And it was only after I became friends with you guys that I really understood that these weren't just people bothering me or wanting an autograph that they were going to sell, that I was a piece of their childhood, like I'm a piece of your childhood. He might not have said it quite the way that I'm saying it to you, but it was the same thought, which was very touching. That, obviously he knew he was adored. When they retired his uniform, he got like a 10-minute standing ovation. You know how long a 10-minute standing ovation is at Yankee Stadium? It just wouldn't stop. He knew he was adored. He knew how popular he was in a certain sense, but I don't think he got the poignancy of it and the personal level beyond cheering a home run. That he was a part of so many people's personal biography in one way or another. And when I did his eulogy in Dallas in 1995, I alluded to the fact that that was true of someone whose team was the Yankees. But it was also true if you were a Cub fan and your guy was Ernie Banks, or a Tiger fan and your guy was Al Kaline, or for so many people, Willie Mays. And I think that's why it resonated, because I got so many letters. That was back when people wrote letters. I got like 5,000 letters after Mantle's eulogy. And many of them mentioned this. I was not a Yankee fan. I was, a Cleveland Indian fan. And my guy was Rocky Colavito or whatever. But I got what you were talking about. So there.
No, I remember watching the ESPN Sports Century documentary, and it was so powerful. Pat Summerall says, he goes, Mickey said, if I have another drink, I want you to kill me. Like that. Like, I can't go back to that. And, that speech he gave when he says, God gave me all these gifts and he's like, to all the kids out there, don't be like me. Bob, I thought that was so heroic that he said that. Like, that was unbelievable vulnerability. And it's a clip of you saying, we want our heroes to be a certain way, but they're not. And God knows they're not perfect. But the fact that Mickey was so honest about it, I thought was so courageous.
Yeah, Mickey had a lot of virtues. People want simplistic stories. They want the guy to be some sort of movie hero, a movie that is just hagiographic rather than a movie better made with nuance and shadings. They want their heroes to be that. Or they want to be able to say, oh, it was all a fraud, screw him. Mickey Mantle was a combination of flaws and vulnerabilities, but also tremendous virtues, which were not confined to his God-given baseball ability. All of his teammates attested that he, arguably the biggest star along with Willie Mays of his time, every rookie on the team, he treated as if it was Whitey Ford or, Casey Stengler, Yogi Berra. He was kind and generous. There was something wistful about him. There was a kind of poignancy about him. I think in the eulogy, I said something like, we kids knew there was something poignant about Mickey Mantle even before we knew what poignant meant. There was a kindness in him and a generosity of spirit. Plus, he was very funny. He was a great joke teller, and could get off a witty line. Like most of us, he was a combination of pluses and minuses. It's just in his case, as famous as he was, it was all writ very large.
Yeah, there's no question about it. A couple more and we'll get you out of here. I was talking off and over text, and I said, okay, we'll talk about your favorite movies. And you said, well, favorite movies, it's too vast and we can't possibly encompass that. So the better question, as you phrased it, was movies that stuck with you as a kid. Which movies have resonated for you?
I grew up in New York, and people of a certain age will remember this. There was something on Channel 9, back when most cities, they had 3 channels, ABC, NBC, CBS, but there were 3 independent channels in New York, channels 5, 9, and 11, in addition to 13, which was the PBS station. And Channel 9, which carried the Mets when they came into existence, but Channel 9 had something called the $1 Million Movie. And every weekday at 7 p.m., they played the same movie. And then they played it back to back on Saturday and Sunday. So in theory, you could watch the same movie 9 times in a week. Okay. So now I'm 7 years old. So this is what struck me when I'm 7 years old. King Kong, which I'm sure I've seen more than 20 times, the original one from 1933.
Fay Wray.
King or Fay Ray, which here's something I never understood. Okay. King Kong is holding Fay Ray above the New York streets from the top of the Empire State Building. Now, I realize that there's great peril in being in the ape's giant hand. On the other hand, she's wriggling crazily, trying to get free. What happens if you liberate yourself from the ape's grip? You plunge 100+ stories to your doom. So basically, you should be kind of cuddling up to the ape, right? But that didn't really occur to her.
Very little favor.
So Jimmy Cagney in Yankee Doodle Dandy, and this is what's so strange. I might have been 9 when I latched onto this one. Double Indemnity, yes. One of the great film noirs. Barbara Stanwyck, Fred McMurray, which struck me as a kid as odd because we knew him then as the star of My Three Sons, which was not even a mid-level sitcom, canned laughter. Never anything really that funny, just bland. But here was Fred McMurray, in black and white with Edward G. Robinson. It was one of the great film noir movies ever. Raymond Chandler, I think Raymond Chandler wrote the screenplay along with Billy Wilder, who directed it. And Raymond Chandler was the king of film noir. Yeah,
what's amazing is people often say greatest scripts ever. Robert Towne recently passed away, and people say, is Chinatown the greatest script ever? It's a little bit of revisionist history because actually Polanski did a lot of work on the script, wasn't credited with it, directed it, but actually worked on the script a lot. But I'm with you. If someone says to me, greatest script ever, I think Double Indemnity is on the Mount Rushmore, a very short list. It is so sharp, Bob, and cynical and acidic and eminently quotable.
Yeah, and all those terse film noir type or Raymond Chandler novel type dialogue. And little asides, one that I got when I was like 12 years old, they bring in a guy. It involves a double indemnity insurance claim. There's a murder thing, and Stanwyck and McMurray are lovers, and they want to do in her husband. And the way they decide that they'll do him in is to push him off the back of a train, right? Because it's double indemnity, insurance policies, things that couldn't possibly really happen. You're kidnapped by an ape who throws you off the top of the Empire State Building. Double indemnity for those who are cashing in on the policy. So killed by falling off a train, double indemnity, double the payoff, right? So they bring in some guy who supposedly was on the train. And the guy, Edward G. Robinson, is the kind of grizzled insurance examiner. He knows all the ins and outs. He's not going to fall for any crap, right? And so the witness, he says, Keyes, who's Edward G. Robinson's character, says, what are you doing? He says, I'm going to see an osteopath here in town. And this is like 1944, right? And Edward G. Robinson says, wow, I hope she's good. Now, there weren't that many female doctors in 1944. Mr. Keyes, I'm a Medford man, Medford, Oregon. I have an osteopath here in New York. The likelihood that he was ever in New York is slim. I have an osteopath here in New York. I'd like to see. Well, I hope she's good. I'm 12 years old. They're slipping this stuff in there.
Edward G. Robinson, unbelievable as Keyes. When he says, I always thought you were a little smarter, but you're not. You're just a little taller. And the times he repeats, he goes, I know, my little man tells me. I mean, it's just indelible lines.
It's fantastic.
Bob Costas, the legend. Last thought for you. It's amazing because when you've had a career, 50+ years in broadcasting, people can know so many different things. And I think for a lot of those people, it is the Olympics. And my dad was so excited, sent me a picture. Here's your friend, Bob Costas. You and Al Michaels and Mike Tirico rejoined together. I think for a lot of people who are sentimental, it's okay. That's great. We always embody you as a part of the Olympics. You're part of that fabric. How rewarding was it for you to be part of the coverage again?
I don't think I was really part of the coverage. Al and I flanked Tirico, the Eiffel Tower in the background, and the main set for the primetime presentation. And we just offered kind of an overview of what the Olympics has meant to us and what it will mean in the United States when the Olympics come back to Los Angeles in 2028. I think it was more just the idea of being back in the fold. NBC invited us to come to Paris along with our wives and just go to whatever events we wanted to go to and enjoy ourselves. So it was that gesture was very much appreciated. And we didn't even get to Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte.
Oh, that's right. If you want to squeeze it in, it's up to you. Or we can save it for next time. It's your choice.
Well, it's a podcast. You have an actual out time.
No, we don't.
You do?
But see, you're right. There is no hot tub. I feel bad keeping you long, but you're right. There is no podcast can go for 75 minutes. You're right. Hush, hush, sweet Charlotte. Go ahead.
So, you're talking about what kind of gets you when you're a kid.
Yeah.
I was 13 years old when I saw Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte, which is directed by Robert Aldridge, who did The Dirty Dozen, among other films. But he had also done Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, which is actually more famous than Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte. Yeah. But I think Hush, Hush is the better film. And Joan Crawford, who had starred with Bette Davis in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, apparently they wanted her to play the role that eventually went to Olivia de Havilland when there was some contract dispute with Joan Crawford. And, anytime someone aces a role, it's impossible to see anyone else in that role. This film is so great, and it calls upon Bette Davis and Olivia de Havilland to chew up all the scenery, but it's not like they're overdoing it. It's just, right. It fits.
It's larger than life characters. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And there's so much suspense built up, and it starts early on. A young Bruce Dern, maybe the first film of any consequence he's ever in, he gets murdered in the most grisly way. And it shocks you because you're not expecting it. It comes right at the beginning of the film. And then you also note that Victor Buono, who then was like 26 years old, plays Bette Davis's father. Now, they shoot Bette Davis in 1927 in all kinds of shadows. And then most of the film takes place in 1964 in Louisiana, in the mansion where Bette Davis is holed up. She's Sweet Charlotte. She's slowly losing her mind. And now Olivia de Havilland and Joseph Cotten plot to push her completely over the edge so that they can inherit everything. Those are the outlines of the film. But, a story is one thing. And then you have the performances. Then you also have the cinematography. You have all the other elements that go into making something greater than the sum of its parts. This film, I swear, if you told me Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte was on right now, and I was alone someplace, I think I'd still be too frightened to watch it. I think I need armed guards if I'm going to watch Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte again. Now, who cares about this stuff except here we are, right? You and I care about it. I don't know if we alienated the entire audience. Patti Page, who was the big deal singer in the 1950s, the Sing and Rage, Patti Page, recorded Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte. There's a song, Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte. Charlotte, don't you cry. Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, I'll love you till I die. And then he did, because it was Bruce Dern's character, supposedly, who'd written the story. Okay, so this is 1965. You can get a single, a 45, to buy it at a record store and put it on a turntable, right? And my dad, who had taken me to the film, knows how absorbed I was by it, but truly frightened by it. Okay, so I go down to the basement, to the playroom, there's games and stuff and whatnot in the playroom, and he locks the door, right? And we had a laundry chute that you could just like throw the dirty clothes and it went right down on top of the washing machine. Okay. He then takes the record player and pipes Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte into the basement. But he's turned out all the lights and I can't escape.
I'm going to terrorize young Bob right now.
I was 13 years old. By the time I got upstairs, I was 26. That's how much it aged me.
I aged quite a bit in that night because of Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte. I have to mention this because when we had dinner with Ben Mankiewicz, you had a great question to me and Ben. You go, name a director of the 60s and 70s who was not A-list, but was an outstanding guest on Later. And so Ben and I start thinking, they go, not A-list, he goes, but a prominent director. When I hear it, when I say his name, you guys know who he is. I'm like, okay. So I said Sidney Pollack, and Mankiewicz goes, no, but you would know Sidney Pollack would be good. And you said John Frankenheimer. The reason I mention it is I just watched Seconds, which is a film on Criterion Channel with Rock Hudson and Frankenheimer directed. Fantastic film, very unnerving psychological thriller. But if you have an aside on John Frankenheimer, what a good guest he was with you. People, of course, I think know his.
Yeah, he was so well spoken about the films. Sometimes people can do something very well, like in sports. You can name a lot of great hitters, but you wanted to hear Ted Williams or Tony Gwynn talk about hitting. You want to hear Jerry Seinfeld deconstruct a comedy routine, why this joke should go before, not after that joke, or why the syllables actually matter and how you set the thing up. They understand and can articulate what it is they do better than those of equal ability might be able to. And Frankenheimer was great in that respect. Some of those laters are knocking around on YouTube. Some guy in Cleveland recorded all of them on his VHS in the late 80s and early 90s. And so I don't know if the Frankenheimer one is out there, but if you Google it, you find out in a minute or two. And my last thought is this, like about Billy Wilder. Think about the range. This guy does
Sunset Boulevard, Double Indemnity, The Apartment,
Sunset Boulevard, but also Some Like It Hot, right? And the 7-Year Itch, and the Fortune Cookie. I mean, that the range of the light comedy to film noir and all points in between. This guy was a master.
I agree. Underappreciated director, Hungarian immigrant, thick accent, but you're right. He could do it all, whether it's comedies and drama. It was amazing. Harry Krinsky, you get the last thought. This is your chance to ask Bob Costas a question. Harry, you're a huge basketball fan. Bob called games at NBC for a long time. Whatever you want, Harry, you get the final shot here with Bob. What do you got?
Wow.
I got nothing.
No,
there he is. There was just a delay there.
I got a question about the podcasting as a medium, because we were talking about this. We were talking about the aggregating, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
How has, as somebody who was that mediator between the audience and the stars, how has that changed in your mind now that athletes and players and all of these folks have their own podcasts and their own outlets?
Yeah. Well, they have their own podcast or their own Twitter account or X, whatever it is now, their own Instagram. And so they can get their message out any way they want. Not to drop a name, but I happened to be with Jerry Seinfeld about a month ago. And he mentioned that he thought that Later was a forerunner of podcasts because they were open-ended conversations. And if it's 22 minutes minus the commercials and the hello and goodbye for a half-hour show. But if the guest was good enough, we just keep taping, and it'd be 2 nights in a row, or sometimes even more than that. Paul McCartney was 3 shows, as I remember. But the difference is, to your question, Harry, at that time, the audience was those who saw the show, or now those who might see it on YouTube, where they take the commercials out. Now, somebody might have said, hey, did you see that show the other night when Jerry Seinfeld was on with Bob Costas? They might say that. But you didn't have vultures who were picking it apart and ripping it from its context. Even when it's appreciative, almost always there's a clickbait headline that makes a response to a question seem like a grand proclamation that doesn't have the tone of voice or the twinkle in the eye, the offhanded nature of it. It's all lost, either because of haste and carelessness, because of cynicism and deliberate dishonesty, or just because the person doing it doesn't have to clear any bar of credibility or experience or capability. And so you get a huge variety of quality to this stuff. And this is what gives me pause. I mean, anyone who's watching this knows that I love to have these conversations at greater length than television generally allows. But part of the peril is that no matter how good-natured the intention, no matter the value of what you say in its full context, guaranteed that aggregators, some of whom are predators, will just pounce upon it for their own purposes. And then you would think people would pick up on this by now, but people act as if that's the totality of it. And then they respond to it in that way. Just one example, and this is a personal beef. My Hall of Fame speech in 2018 in Cooperstown was an homage to the game and to the craft of broadcasting and to those who I've worked with and those I admired. And so somewhere in the course of that, I made the point of saying, very often in sports, and perhaps especially in baseball, the way we remember the greatest moments is influenced by how they were described by the great broadcasters. And I mentioned Vin Scully and Jack Buck on the same play, Kirk Gibson's home run. Scully's great call, and then Buck on the radio. I don't believe what
I don't believe what I just saw. Yeah.
Correct. Okay, so our friend Jason Stark, on his Twitter post, said, from Bob Costas's lovely Hall of Fame speech, the way we remember the great moments in baseball is often influenced by those who called it. And I saw it because it was Jason. Otherwise, I wouldn't have seen it. And then beneath it, there's comments, many of them appreciative, but some are like, oh, so Costa's trying to give himself credit. The whole thing had almost nothing to do with me. It was an homage to the craft, to the game, and to others who have done it well. Now, does that really matter in the big picture of things? No, but it indicates something. If we're all just grains of sand on the beach, a geologist can take that grain of sand and tell you what the beach is like. And moments like that, relatively harmless as they are, tell us about the disinformation and distortion machine that we're living in. That one is relatively benign and inconsequential. But think about our politics. Think about the way people's reputations are shaped or influenced. It's not an honest discussion. Sometimes because it's deliberately dishonest and cynical, but other times because it's just sloppy and lazy. And this is where people are getting their information. I heard it somewhere. I saw it on Facebook. Oh, I don't know. I heard it. Many people are saying, who made that phrase famous? Many people are saying, well, that must be true. Many people are saying, I saw it someplace. I saw it online. Oh, yeah, that's fine. No distinction between the guy who won the Pulitzer and the guy who was commenter number 473 or jerk off 602 on his Twitter account.
All of them get equal weight in this toilet bowl of Twitter.
Correct. Yeah. Just as the following. Okay.
Yeah.
That person's vote counts just the same as yours and mine, or as the late great wrestling manager Bobby the Brain Heenan said to me on Later.
Yeah.
Only two things concern me about wrestling fans: they can vote and they can breed. Now, what? Now people will say, oh, Costas says all wrestling fans. No, it's a joke. It's a joke, Bird Brain. It's a joke. And Bobby the Brain Heenan said it. And like all good jokes, it contains an element of truth.
Okay, since you brought up the wrestling, the interviews with Vince McMahon are unbelievable. And in Jim Miller's exhaustive HBO book, you're quoted on it and discussed it. Well, people have to, I can't do it justice unless you see it. But it was so great, Bob, because it really was like elemental as purest form, because you're smart and funny and learned. And I'm not saying Vince isn't, but he's using his size to his advantage, right? Intimidating, bullying. And you just wouldn't take the bait. And it was amazing seeing it, watching it live and wondering what's artificial, what's wrestling. But I was like, no, it's genuine. These guys are both going at it, so to speak.
And it was live, not taped. And because it's HBO, there were no commercial interruptions. And you're right. He was getting very angry. He didn't like the line of questioning. And he's coming forward in his seat. And very often, I think, on television, tone rather than content is what wins out. So if you looked at a transcript, Vince isn't dumb. He made reasonably good points and had decent responses to my questions. But by tone, he's losing it. And I'm remaining fairly calm. Now, subsequently, Vince, who in his best moments is very funny, and I give him full credit for his achievements as a businessman and for being a very good performer on his own terms. But Vince has taken to saying, if Bob was bigger, I would have given them some really good television. And my response is, let's test this premise. Let's suppose someone's on Meet the Press. I guess I said this when Chuck Todd was the moderator of Meet the Press. Okay, so the senator from Nebraska, whoever he may be, is on Meet the Press. And hey, he and Chuck are in the same weight class. They each go about 170 to 175. In that case, since it would be a fair fight, if the senator objects to the line of questioning, he should just throw down with Chuck Todd. This is the premise you've laid out there, Vince. I think once again, you have taken yourself into an intellectual cul-de-sac. And I prevail by not doing anything, except letting you say or do something that indicts itself. On the other hand, there are people who actually believe that the merit of it would be decided by who could win a back alley fight. And some of those people are Vince's fans. The
problem of the world, Bob, this is how primitive it gets. If you outclass me, if you outsmart me, I'm just going to go kick your ass in the alley. This is what it comes down to.
Right. And of course, if you outsmart them, that means you're an elitist. Right. Because, actually knowing stuff, actually having read books, actually being able to express yourself cogently, that makes you an elitist. You want to be don't you want to be a regular guy, Adnan? Don't you want to forget all that stuff you've learned about movies and about sports and all the books you've read and your appreciation of language? Do you want to be an elitist? Stop before it's too late. By the way, Vince McMahon goes charging out of the studio, slams the door behind him. And studio doors are heavy. It's not like your screen door at your house. Studio doors are heavy. You've got to have a lot of strength to slam a studio door. And there's only like a 30-second bumper of what's coming up next week between me and the next guest. And for me to move to one part of the set to the other.
Well, that was fun. Come up next, Joe Piscopo on his latest film.
Incorrect. The next guest, Bob Knight. So I sit down, I say, Coach, this is the one time in your life when your presence will lower the temperature in the room.
Perfect.
There you have it.
Bobby Knight. We're not going to beat that. The great Bob Costas, of course, you can see him on MLB Network. He's my friend and my colleague. You can see him on TBS calling games with Ron Darling. He's on CNN as well, opining. And I'm just so glad we got to talk movies, Bob. Obviously, you've been such a great friend to me and somebody who I deeply respect, and a lot of great laughter as well. Hush, hush, sweet Charlotte. I'm glad we got it done.
Scares the bejesus out of you.